Welcome back. Now we answer questions we've received from you, our viewer. If you have a question, visit our website, QuranSpeaks.com. Now, Dr. Shabir, we have a question from Jack all the way in Italy. Here's the question now.
Dr. Shabir, this is Jack Lundy calling from Italy. An important tenet of Islam is apparently the absolute condemnation of any follower who deserts the faith for another religion. In your analysis, how far should this be understood? I mean, some fundamentalists consider a deserter from Islam as a traitor who deserves the most extreme punishment. Why can't Islam be more flexible on this point?
So, Dr. Shabir, how do you respond to Jack?
Well, Jack, I would say that, it's not an important tenet in Islam at all. In fact, this has more to do with the political situation in the time when classical Islamic law was being elaborated. And it's a misunderstood teaching. So let me try to deconstruct that. So what Jack is referring to, Sophia, as we all know, is that in classical Islamic law, it was thought that if somebody reneges from the religion of Islam, that person deserves to be put to death. And now that seems to have been a mistaken conclusion from some historical situations. When the Muslims were at war with others, meaning that others were trying to root out this newfound religion and to decimate the Muslim population, Muslims had to fight to retain their existence. And if somebody was a Muslim, that person was called on to defend the frontiers of Islam, especially an able-bodied man. And so from every family, you could have like a Muslim soldier going out, not as a paid soldier, but to be called on a whim whenever the community is under attack. And that would mean that the average individual knew some of the military secrets and the weaknesses of the Muslims. And if one were to leave the community and go join another community, one would be departing with such secrets. Now, in our modern times, we can appreciate that in an army person may not be looked at with calm if he is associating with somebody who he can leak military secrets to. So he wouldn't be drinking bodies with someone else, depending on their level of clearance, obviously, and what knowledge they're privy to. So in that Islamic context, it was thought that if somebody is going to leave the community and join another, then that would be a matter of threat and danger to the existing Muslim community. So that's why they were dealt with harshly.
So they were seen as political traitors. Then.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So it wasn't just simply a matter of leaving the religion. Those who want to say, well, no, this is a requirement in Islamic law, might cite a narrative of the Prophet, peace be upon him, where it is reported that the Prophet said, if somebody changes his religion and leaves the community, then you should kill him. But they omit that last part about leaving the community. Now, today, the world is like a global village, and the communities are integrated. So if one leaves the faith of Islam, he's not necessarily leaving the community in the same sense as it was in the past. You might say he's leaving the Muslim community as community of believers around the mosque, but he's not, or the world community of Muslims, you can say. But it's no longer a political threat. It's not like taking up citizenship in another country. As for the Quran, in fact, it is clear from the Quran that there should be no compulsion in religion. The Quran in Surah 2, verse 256 says, La ikraha fid din. There is no compulsion in religion. And
that's a pretty definite statement.
It is.
Right?
It is. In fact, it's a very strong statement. And it is a statement grammatically in Arabic. It's of the same type of statement as our profession of faith, which negates by saying, La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. So the negating part is given in an absolute grammatical form. La ilaha, with the a ending on the word for God, Allah, instead of Allahu, it's Allah. La ilaha. This grammatical ending means in Arabic an absolute type of negation. So when it says La ikraha with the same a ending here, this is also an absolute negation. There is to be no compulsion in religion. So when it's so absolutely negated, and now we look on the other hand and we say that if you are compelling a person to remain a Muslim on pain of death, then you're doing compulsion. So you are going against what the Quran says. And classical commentators on the Quran who thought that the apostate should be killed have acknowledged that here, we have something to explain here, but they have their own way of explaining it. And generally, they go with traditions. They say, well, the tradition says that, so this verse could not really mean that. There is an exception to this general rule, or this general rule is abrogated by this one circumstance or something of this nature. But once we give full force to the Quranic statement, which is so absolute in its negation of any compulsion in religion, we realize that you cannot really compel a person to remain a Muslim. A person is free to either believe or disbelieve. Other verses of the Quran are along the same lines. For example, in the 17th chapter of the Quran, فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. Whoever wants, let him or her believe. Whoever wants, let them disbelieve. So people have the full freedom to either believe or disbelieve. There's an interesting verse in the Quran which indicates that there were people at the time who were not Muslims, but who were toying with the religion in order to cast doubt in the minds of the committed believers. So they were saying to each other, according to the Quran, "Aminu billadhi unzila alayhi wajha an-nahari wakfuru akhirahu la'allahum yarji'un." So they're saying to each other, let's believe in what is being revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in the early part of the day, and let us renege by evening, so that the Muslims would, be confused and they too might leave the religion. So, because when people think, okay, somebody's embraced the religion, we get, we're so happy and saying, glory be to God. The person is, we feel like fortified in our own faith because this is a kind of ratification. And then if somebody leaves the faith, we start wondering, was something wrong with the faith? So it puts that doubt in your mind. So this is what people were trying to do at the time. And the Quran is referring to this practice. But the Quran does not continue by saying, okay, so, deal severely with those people who are doing this. Rather, the Quran shows that there should be a continuing dialogue, continuing preaching and pleading with them and showing them evidence and proof and so on to bring them into the faith. More to the point, I should add here that if the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was killing people for the fact of leaving the religion of Islam, then these would have been the prime targets right here, because by their own, the Quran is clearly saying that these people are doing this. Mm-hmm. They're embracing it by morning and then leaving it by afternoon.
But these people continue to exist in the society for quite a long time. They continue to exist,
right? And they continue to, play this game. And that was possible because the Prophet, peace be upon him, was not killing people for the mere fact of reneging on the religion of Islam. Mm-hmm. But there are some reported incidents which should be interpreted, if these incidents are really genuine, because a report saying that the Prophet, peace be upon him, did something on a certain occasion, it's not necessarily genuine. It could be something that was invented later on or mistakenly reported. But assuming that it happened, then it should be interpreted as indicating that the Prophet, peace be upon him, dealt harshly with some persons who posed a political threat in the way in which they left the Muslim community, probably with knowledge of the Muslim whereabouts and where their weaknesses lay, and where they may be open to, where they may be vulnerable to attack by the non-Muslim forces who were determined to wipe out this new religion and its followers.
So, Dr. Shabir, one last question. Why do you think some people do believe that apostasy or leaving the religion will just lead to death for the person? Why do you think Muslims believe that?
Well, some Muslims are following classical Islamic rulings on this, and it was widely acknowledged among classical jurists that this is how it should be dealt with, because those jurists gave more credence to the narratives which are in Islamic tradition outside of the Quran. And sometimes they compressed the meaning of the Quran in order to give space to those other traditions. Whereas On my way of explaining this, I'm giving full force to the Quranic statement, and I'm giving an interpretation of the other narratives, or looking at the other narratives in a way that would not diminish the full force of what the Quran is saying. So it's two different paradigms on how we look at this. And when we examine the classical paradigm, we see, apart from the difficulties that I've already pointed out, I should add here very quickly that the Hanafi school of Islamic jurisprudence has a very interesting take on this, saying that it's only the men who are apostates that should be put to death. Women should be treated differently. Maybe they should be imprisoned, but not put to death. Now, why would he give a different ruling in the case of women? I said he as if I'm referring to the founder of the school, Imam Abu Hanifa, but the school more generally. Why would the school give a different ruling? If the apostasy is such a sin that requires death, because if we think of adultery, for example, which was also ruled on harshly in classical Islamic jurisprudence, the same rule was for both men and women. Why would there be a different rule for women? Did they get off free by committing the same sin? So the only explanation that I think is applicable in this case is that in the case of the man, he may go and join another army, whereas in the case of the woman, there is no danger that she's going to go join another army, or her potential for leaking out the secrets of the Muslim army, or her even the knowledge of the military secrets of the Muslim society may not be developed as that of the man who might have been one of the fighting soldiers and who would be more privy to the military secrets. So that shows that the real problem of apostasy was not so much the person leaving the faith, but the person leaving the faith and the community in such a way as to pose a threat to the physical existence of the Muslim community.
Thank you for those insights, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
If you enjoyed this video, click like and subscribe. And please donate to support our work at QuranSpeaks.com.